The city was alive with darkness, its streets humming with whispers and danger. The skyline burned gold and crimson under the evening sun, but beneath that beauty lay shadows that no light could reach. Victor Drazan, the most feared Mafia boss in the city, sat in his private office atop the tallest tower. His eyes, cold and sharp, scanned the documents before him, but his mind was elsewhere. A deal had been proposed. Not any ordinary deal, but a union, a marriage, that would secure his control over the rival families. It was a marriage without love, without warmth, and yet it was necessary. Victor did not need affection. He needed power. He looked at the name again. Isabella Solari. She was the daughter of the Solari family, a family known for their influence and wealth. Yet her people had grown weak, vulnerable to enemies, and now Victor's family could extend their grip through this arrangement. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. He did not care for romance. He cared for survival and dominance. Isabella Solari had lived a life of cautious perfection. Every word she spoke, every movement she made had been calculated. Yet even she had not expected this, the cold proposition of marriage from the most feared man in the city. Her heart had jumped when she first received the message, but her face remained composed, unreadable. She would not show fear. Not to him. Not to anyone. The day of the wedding arrived under an overcast sky, gray clouds heavy with promise of rain. The venue was grand, a palace of stone and candlelight glittering with wealth and shadow alike. Guests arrived, eyes wide, murmuring about the cold Mafia boss and the Solari heiress. Every step Isabella took, every glance Victor threw her way, carried weight. There was no warmth, only calculated observation, as though they were assessing each other for weakness. Victor's presence was commanding. He moved with an easy confidence, yet every gesture was precise, measured. Isabella noted the way his jaw tightened, the sharpness in his eyes. There was a danger about him, a dark power that made her pulse quicken. She did not trust him, yet part of her could not look away. The ceremony began quietly, with whispers and gasps following every movement. When Victor reached Isabella at the altar, there was no softness, no affection in his touch. He merely took her hand with a firmness that left her unsure if it was an offer of trust or a silent warning. Isabella met his gaze steadily, refusing to give him the satisfaction of fear. The vows were spoken, words hollow but binding. The deal was sealed, a union of power more than love. Yet as the ceremony ended, a strange tension lingered. Something unspoken hovered between them, a sense that neither was entirely in control despite appearances. The first night in their shared suite was silent. Isabella unpacked her belongings with careful attention, avoiding Victor's gaze, though she could feel him watching her. Victor, for his part, remained distant, pacing the room with sharp, deliberate steps. He was a man of habits, of rules, and one rule above all was clear: do not trust anyone fully. Yet even as he maintained his cold facade, he could not ignore the subtle strength in Isabella, the courage that gleamed in her eyes. Hours passed in tension. Neither spoke, each observing the other with quiet scrutiny. Finally, Victor broke the silence, his voice low and steady. "This is a deal," he said, each word deliberate. "Nothing more. Nothing less." Isabella nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I understand." And yet beneath those words, both felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar. A curiosity, a pull, a tension that neither could name. Their honeymoon was arranged in secrecy, a small villa on the edge of the city where no one could watch them. The journey there was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The first night on the villa grounds, the wind howled like a living creature, and lightning split the sky. Victor moved near the window, eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. There was a sound, and subtle, almost imperceptible. Then a crash. The villa shook and the door burst open, carried by the violent storm. Victor reacted instantly. Every instinct sharpened. He moved toward Isabella, pulling her behind him, shielding her with his body as if the storm were nothing compared to the threat he sensed. Isabella's breath caught in her throat, but she did not panic. She trusted him, not fully perhaps, but enough to let his strength envelop her. The storm raged on, but Victor's eyes were sharp, scanning for intruders. Each shadow could hide a threat. Each whisper of wind could conceal danger. Then he saw it, a figure moving against the storm, approaching their refuge. Victor's hand brushed against his gun, ready to defend, ready to strike. Isabella stepped closer instinctively, her hand brushing his arm. For the first time, Victor felt a flicker of something he had not expected. Protectiveness, fierce and raw. It was not just about power anymore. He could not let her be hurt. Not her. The intruder fled as suddenly as they appeared, disappearing into the storm's darkness. Victor exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders, but the storm outside mirrored the one inside the room. Isabella looked at him, her eyes wide, her breath catching. For a moment, the world was reduced to the space between them. Tension, curiosity, and something more dangerous. Attraction. Victor finally spoke, his voice softer than before, almost human. "You are not like the others," he said. "You do not fear me as they do." Isabella met his gaze, steady and composed. "I do not fear you because I do not trust anyone easily," she said. "I watch, I learn. I survive." There was a silence after her words, but it was not empty. It was charged, heavy with meaning, with unspoken questions and possibilities neither dared voice aloud. Victor studied her, realizing that in her strength, her courage, she was unlike anyone he had ever known. And for the first time, he felt a flicker of uncertainty, a dangerous feeling for a man who ruled by certainty. The storm eventually passed, leaving a calm night and a sky littered with stars. Victor and Isabella sat near the window, silent yet aware of each other. The world outside had threatened them, but it had also revealed a strange truth. Survival was not just about dominance or power. Sometimes it was about trust, even if only a little, even if only for a moment. As the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, the peace was brief. A message arrived at the villa, slipped under the door, wet from the storm. Victor picked it up, eyes scanning the words. His jaw tightened and he did not speak immediately. Finally, he looked at Isabella, voice low and sharp. "This is not over. The deal we made, it is only the beginning." Isabella felt a chill run through her, though she did not show it. "Then we survive it," she said simply. Victor's eyes met hers, dark and intense. "If we survive this, nothing can break us," he murmured. The words hung in the air, heavy with promise and threat alike. Both knew that the road ahead would be dangerous, filled with enemies, with secrets, and with forces neither fully understood. And yet, for the first time, something else stirred between them. A connection born from necessity, from danger, and from the strange, undeniable pull of two people bound by circumstance yet tempted by something far more human. Curiosity, trust, and perhaps the beginning of desire. The villa, once a sanctuary, now felt like the edge of the world. Outside, the city whispered in shadows. Inside, two hearts beat in quiet, cautious rhythm, each aware of the other, each wondering how this deal, this cold, calculated arrangement, could change everything. And as the sun rose over the storm-ravaged city, both Victor and Isabella knew one undeniable truth. This marriage was no longer just a deal. Something more dangerous, more compelling had begun. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky washed in pale light. The villa's walls, battered by wind and rain, seemed smaller, almost fragile compared to the tension that still lingered between Victor Drazan and Isabella Solari. Outside, the city hummed quietly, unaware of the danger that had brushed so close the night before. Inside, silence stretched like a thread, unbroken but taut with anticipation. Victor did not sleep. He paced the room, his boots heavy against the floor, mind alert to every possible threat. Isabella sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes sharp and watchful. She was learning quickly. Victor's strength was not only in his power over the city, but in the careful attention he paid to every detail, every movement. To survive, she would need to match him in patience, in awareness, and in courage. When Victor finally spoke, it was with the precision of a blade. "We leave tonight," he said. "I have arranged a private plane. We cannot risk anyone finding us here." Isabella nodded, rising gracefully. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice calm, but curiosity edged every word. "Somewhere safe," Victor replied. He did not elaborate, but she could sense the distance in his tone, the kind that carried secrets he did not share lightly. The plane was small, private and silent, slicing through the early morning sky. Isabella sat beside Victor, her hands resting lightly on her lap, studying him. There was a quiet intensity in his gaze. a mixture of caution and something else, something she could not name. The tension from their wedding, from the night of the storm, hung between them like a heavy curtain. Hours passed, the plane cutting across miles of sky. Finally, Victor's hand rested on the armrest, and he glanced at Isabella. "We will land on an island," he said. "Remote, difficult to reach. No one will follow us there." She raised an eyebrow, curiosity mingling with a trace of unease. "An island?" "Yes, a place where we can be alone, where we can survive." His voice was steady, but there was a flicker of intensity in his eyes, a mixture of calculation and concern. "It is not meant to be comfortable. It is meant to keep us safe." When the plane touched down, the wind was sharp and cold, carrying with it the scent of salt and pine. The island was isolated, its cliffs rising like guardians against the sea. The trees were thick, the paths narrow and treacherous, but Victor moved through them with ease, every step precise, every gesture controlled. Isabella followed, her boots gripping the uneven ground, heart racing in a mixture of fear and excitement. The villa they had been assigned on the island was modest but sturdy, perched on the edge of a cliff. Waves crashed against the rocks below, a reminder that the island was wild, untamed, and not entirely welcoming. As Victor closed the door behind them, the storm from the city seemed distant, but the tension inside the room remained. Victor did not speak for several hours. He moved about methodically, checking locks, inspecting windows, and placing objects strategically. Isabella watched him, a mixture of fascination and unease stirring in her chest. Here, away from the city, she could see his strength more clearly, not just the power that commanded respect and fear, but the strength that protected, that kept him alive in a world built on threats and betrayal. Night fell, and the wind rose again, howling through the trees. Victor remained vigilant, eyes scanning the darkness outside, while Isabella lit candles, their soft glow illuminating the room. Shadows danced across the walls, reflecting the tension and uncertainty that clung to them both. Hours later, a scream pierced the night. It was not human. A creature large and shadowy prowled the grounds near the villa. Victor moved instantly, pulling Isabella behind him, his body shielding hers as he assessed the threat. She could feel his pulse, fast and steady, the calm ferocity of a man who had faced death countless times. "You are not afraid," Victor said quietly, almost in disbelief, as he directed her to follow him toward safety. "I am cautious," Isabella replied, voice steady. "I do not panic. I survive." His eyes softened slightly, not with warmth, but with acknowledgement. She was more than she seemed, resourceful, brave, and sharp. He realized that he could not dismiss her, could not treat her as someone weak or fragile. She was his equal in ways that mattered. The night stretched long. They moved through the villa, barricading doors, checking windows, and watching the darkness for movement. Isabella's hands brushed against Victor's arm once, a fleeting contact, but enough to spark an awareness they both could not ignore. By dawn, the creature had vanished, leaving only broken branches and disturbed earth. Victor exhaled, tension leaving his shoulders slowly. Isabella studied him, her heart thumping in her chest. In the night's struggle, something had shifted between them. A bond forged in danger, silent and unspoken, but undeniable. For days they navigated the island together. Victor taught Isabella to move silently through the trees, to watch the shadows, and to listen to the wind. She learned quickly, her instincts sharp and her courage steady. Each challenge, each threat drew them closer, breaking the rules of the marriage they had signed for convenience. The deal, once cold and calculated, began to blur into something far more personal. One afternoon, while climbing a cliff to survey the island, Victor slipped. Isabella's hand shot out instinctively, grabbing his arm and pulling him back from the edge. Heart pounding, breath short, Victor stared at her, a mixture of surprise and admiration in his eyes. "You are reckless," he said, his voice low, but there was a hint of warmth in the reprimand. "And you are too careful," Isabella replied, a small smile on her lips. "Sometimes you must take a risk to survive." Victor's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. He realized that she had not only survived the dangers of the island, but had also survived his scrutiny. She had earned a place beside him, not through fear or submission, but through courage, intelligence, and resilience. As night fell again, they found themselves sitting by a small fire near the villa, the waves crashing below like a steady heartbeat. Silence settled over them, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the quiet of understanding of two people discovering a connection they had not anticipated. Victor finally spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "I did not expect this," he admitted. "I did not expect to respect you, to need you." Isabella's gaze met his, steady and calm. "And I did not expect to see this side of you," she said. "The part that protects, that trusts, even a little." For a long moment, they simply watched the fire, aware of each other's presence, the bond between them growing stronger with every passing day. The island had tested them, forced them to rely on each other, and in that reliance they had found something neither had expected, a strange, undeniable connection. But the peace was fragile. On the fourth day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a shadow appeared at the edge of the trees. Victor's eyes narrowed, hands moving instinctively to his weapon. Isabella felt the change in the air, the presence of someone who did not belong, someone who brought danger. A figure stepped into the clearing, and Victor's jaw tightened. "I should have known," he muttered under his breath. The person was from his past, someone who had long sought to challenge his power. And now, they had found him here on the island, threatening the fragile peace he had built with Isabella. Isabella's hand brushed Victor's once again, this time intentionally. "We face it together," she said quietly. Victor's eyes met hers, dark and intense. For the first time, he allowed himself to acknowledge the truth. He could not face this threat alone. He needed her, not just for survival, but for something deeper, something that had begun to stir between them. As the figure approached, the tension between them became a silent agreement. They would face the danger together, side by side. The storm that had brought them here was not over, and the island held more secrets, more threats than either of them had imagined. Yet in that moment, Victor and Isabella realized that the rules of their marriage and of the deal they had signed no longer mattered. They were partners now, bound not by contract, but by trust, courage, and the beginnings of something neither had expected, loyalty, and perhaps the first sparks of love. And as the night deepened, the shadow from Victor's past drew closer, and the firelight danced across their faces. Both Victor and Isabella knew that the honeymoon, which had promised isolation and safety, had already broken every rule. The test had begun, and the bond they had forged in danger would be tested like never before. The night on the island was silent, yet heavy with anticipation. The figure from Victor's past, cloaked in darkness, moved steadily through the trees, each step deliberate, each motion threatening. Victor Drazan's eyes narrowed, body tense, ready for whatever challenge awaited. He had faced many enemies in the city, but this one was personal. A ghost from his past who would not hesitate to strike. Isabella stood beside him, shoulders squared, eyes sharp. She had learned quickly. Danger demanded focus, courage, and calm. She was no longer the sheltered heiress who had agreed to a cold, calculated marriage. She had become a partner, a strategist, and a force in her own right. "We face this together," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Victor's hand brushed briefly against hers, a silent acknowledgement. "Together," he agreed. The shadow emerged from the trees, revealing a man familiar yet dangerous. Marcus Velen, once Victor's rival in the city, now an enemy who had followed him to the island. His eyes gleamed with intent, his hands poised to strike. Victor's mind raced, calculating each move, anticipating threats, protecting Isabella as fiercely as he had always protected himself. The confrontation began suddenly. Marcus lunged, and Victor met him head-on. The clash was swift and brutal, each movement precise, each strike a test of skill and will. Isabella stayed close, watching, analyzing, waiting for the right moment to act. When Marcus lunged toward Victor from the side, Isabella moved with instinct, grabbing a heavy branch and striking him. The man staggered, and Victor took advantage, overpowering him in a swift, controlled maneuver. Breathing heavily, Victor stood over the defeated rival, eyes dark and intense. "This is over," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Leave and never return." Marcus glared, but he knew Victor's word was final. With one last threat, he vanished into the darkness, leaving the island quiet once more. Victor turned to Isabella, heart still racing from the confrontation. She met his gaze, calm but alert. "You fought well," he said, his voice softening, almost human. "I could not have done it without you." Isabella smiled faintly, a mixture of pride and relief. "And I could not have done it without you," she replied. The tension of the past days began to ease, replaced by a strange warmth, a bond forged through danger and trust. Victor realized that he no longer viewed Isabella as a mere partner in a deal. She was someone he relied on, someone whose courage and strength had earned his respect. And something deeper, something he had never allowed himself to feel. That evening, they sat together on the cliff edge, waves crashing against the rocks below. The storm had passed completely, leaving a sky filled with stars, each one reflecting in the dark sea below. Silence enveloped them, but it was a quiet that felt full, not empty. Victor spoke first, his voice low and contemplative. "This island has changed everything," he said. "It has shown me that trust is not weakness, that connection is not a burden." Isabella looked at him, understanding the weight of his words. "And it has shown me that strength is more than power," she said. "It is courage, loyalty, and the willingness to face danger for someone you care about." Their eyes met, and for a moment the world fell away. They were no longer boss and heiress, no longer bound by a cold deal. They were two people, connected by survival, trust, and the beginnings of love. Days passed on the island, each one bringing small discoveries and quiet moments. Victor taught Isabella how to read the wind, how to track movements in the trees, and how to anticipate danger. Isabella, in turn, shared her own strategies, her intuition and insight proving invaluable. Each lesson, each shared moment deepened the bond between them. One evening, a fire burned bright in the center of the villa. Victor and Isabella sat together, the flames reflecting in their eyes. Victor reached out, taking her hand in his. "I have been a man of rules," he said quietly. "Rules that kept me safe but also kept me from feeling anything, until now." Isabella squeezed his hand gently. "And I have been a woman of caution," she said. "But this island has taught me that taking risks can lead to something more, something worth holding on to." The first spark of confession hung in the air, delicate yet powerful. Victor's eyes softened, the hardness of his demeanor melting into something vulnerable, something human. He realized that the deal they had made, the cold arrangement, had led him to something he had never expected, the chance to feel, to trust, and to care for someone deeply. As the night deepened, the sound of waves became a soothing rhythm, a reminder that the island, though wild and dangerous, had brought them together. Isabella leaned slightly against Victor, a gesture small but significant. He did not pull away. Instead, he allowed himself to accept it, the closeness a silent acknowledgement of their growing bond. Yet the island had one more test in store. A second wave of threats emerged. Not human this time, but the harsh reality of nature itself. The cliffs were unstable after the storms, and a landslide struck near the villa. Rocks tumbled dangerously close, shaking the ground and filling the air with dust. Victor reacted instantly, pulling Isabella to safety, guiding her through the chaos with a precision honed by years of survival. They reached a sheltered area, breathless but unharmed. Victor's hands lingered on hers for a moment longer than necessary, the adrenaline fading and leaving room for something more tender. "We survive everything together," he murmured, voice low but certain. Isabella nodded, eyes shining in the dim light. "Everything," she agreed. The island, harsh and untamed, had forced them to rely on each other, and in doing so had transformed their relationship from a cold arrangement into a partnership of equals. Every challenge, every danger had strengthened their connection, creating a bond neither could ignore. In the days that followed, Victor and Isabella explored the island more deliberately, learning its paths, its secrets, and its dangers. They laughed quietly at small victories, a clever way to catch fish, the discovery of a hidden cove, and found comfort in the presence of one another. The bond that had begun in necessity had grown into respect, trust in something far deeper, affection. One night, as they watched the stars from the cliff, Victor spoke again, his voice filled with a rare vulnerability. "I never thought I could care for anyone," he said. "But you have changed that." Isabella's hand found his, holding it firmly. "And I never thought I could trust anyone so completely," she said. "But I trust you, Victor, more than I have ever trusted anyone." The silence that followed was full of understanding. Words were no longer necessary. The bond between them spoke louder than anything they could say. The island, with all its storms, dangers, and isolation, had created a space where their hearts could meet, and their connection could grow. Finally, the day came when they knew they could leave the island. The threats had passed, and the bond between them had become undeniable. Victor and Isabella packed their belongings, preparing to return to the world that had once demanded fear, control, and calculation. As they stood at the edge of the cliff one last time, looking out over the sea, Victor turned to Isabella. "This deal, it was meant to be business," he said quietly. "But now I know it was something far more." Isabella smiled, eyes bright with emotion. "Yes," she said, "something far more." He took her hand, holding it tightly. "We face everything together from now on," he said. She nodded, heart full. "Everything," she replied, and with that they descended the cliff, ready to return to the world. But the island had left its mark, a bond forged in fire and shadow, a love built on trust and courage, and two hearts transformed forever. As the plane lifted from the island, Victor looked at Isabella and she met his gaze. No words were needed. The dangers they had faced, the challenges they had overcome, and the connection they had forged were enough. Together they could face any storm, any enemy, any rule. The world below was vast and uncertain, but Victor and Isabella knew one thing for certain. The deal that had begun as a cold arrangement had become something stronger, something unbreakable. They had survived the island, faced their fears, and found each other in the process, and that bond forged in the shadows would endure forever.